we do go back a long way, a long, long way to in the 1990s when I had hair and it wasn't grey, and I was probably about 20 kilos lighter. But hey, that's life. And it was an honour and privilege working with Colin, because what we were doing, we were setting up against some opposition, the Pacific uh, Health Research Funding System. And there was a bit of mutual collaboration between the Pacific part of the Health Research Council and the Māori part of the Health Research Council that has its links back to Hoho Tutanaihe, because Hoho said he was an interesting man. Hoho, he was one of the whakapapa experts for Te Araki Niue. And he said, we have a tuakana Taina role here, and it is our job to support our elders and to make sure that we move together as Pacific peoples, Indigenous Pacific peoples. That said, my talk's going to be a little bit different from Tahu's. She's given you the as only Tahu can do, a fantastic summary of where things are at and what awesome things are happening. I want to put a bit of a future lens on this. One of the reasons I moved into the private sector is that well, first of all, I found that a certain university wasn't very good at managing research grants, but also I wanted to be able to get a little bit more flexibility and dynamism and affecting change. So I want to talk about some of the strategies we can do to actually affect some change with regards to Niue and data sovereignty. So my talk is going to be uncharacteristically short for those people who have heard me talk before. And we'll just see if we can share screen. Okay. Great. So I do almost all my work through a company called Insight Analytics. We're an Indigenous-owned company, as Colin said, working in the Pacific, in New Zealand and Australia, a little bit in Europe. And I seem to be spending now lots of my time flying around the country. But part of it is about sort of generating systems and policy and practice that can be reused to implement change. So when you get old, you tend to sit on a lot of boards and governance sort of bodies, and part of that has actually informed what I want to talk to you about today. So this is about what can we do in practice, and some of this is built on some of the scar tissue of 30 years working in research in this country, but some of it has also been built on some recent successes. At the moment, we've got three key themes that are happening in terms of research data governance. We've got data sovereignty in research in Aotearoa. We've got data governance issues. We've got how do we inform change? How do we use data to inform change? Because one of the things we're supposed to be doing in order by gathering data is actually helping make a better future. And that means that we also need to have a really strong outcome focus. Now, part of the problem in Aotearoa at the moment is that we don't actually have the data systems and tools to do that. And that issue is writ large in the Pacific, because you end up with issues of scale, issues of workforce, issues of funding, issues of resource and sustainability and environmental safety. So why is all this important? It's important because one of the reasons that we're collecting all of this data is to actually improve outcomes. But if we're collecting data in a way that is actually making our future worse, or compromising our values, or compromising our kids' future, or devaluing the taonga that we've gathered, then we're not actually going to be doing that, right? We might be thinking that we might have some information for decisions, but the cost of that has been part of it, compromising our future and compromising our sovereignty. So when we're talking about Indigenous futures, it's Indigenous controlled futures, and being able to get data for self-determination. And that means two things. That means being able to gather data ourselves and store it, but also access data that other people have from us or about us, and how we can use both of those sources to determine our own future. Now, that's a little bit tricky at the moment because that's not how data systems were set up, right? Colonial data systems were set up for harvesting data, and we can still see that in the way that certain funding requirements from certain global funding bodies require harvesting of data from national accounts. But also we can see that this is actually going to require some change. And that change has to start with data governance. Because data governance means you're sitting at the decision-making table. You're the ones making the decisions, right? Because you're governing. So if you're making the decisions, you can say, these are our values, and these how we want them embedded in the actions with regards to data. And it means you can actually advocate and inspire, possibly even control the building and sharing of examples of good practice. Now, I'll come back to that because that's actually absolutely essential about where we're going to go. And the governance will also determine safe allies. We can't do this alone. It's one of the reasons why the Global Indigenous Data Alliance started so quickly, was that realized that as separate individual peoples, right, we can't fight this battle alone. We've got lessons we can share and resources we can share, right, and capability that we can share. And in doing so, we're much stronger together. And this is one of the themes I want to make for what could possibly be a future for Pacific data sovereignty, and including but not exclusive to Niue data sovereignty. And that requires we've got to think about the hard stuff now. Right. We have to think about what we want from data governance, and we have to think about what we want from a data environment, a safe data, sovereign data environment. In terms of data governance in the Niuean context, it's actually a real challenge. It's harder than here, right? Because you've got to think about what works within Niue, what works with regards to the compact with the New Zealand government and the obligations that comes with certain aid agreements over and above the governance structures and constitutional structures. What happens with regards to Pacific neighbours, including umbrella organisations like the Pacific Community? How does a data governance model work there? And then how does it work for researchers? What I want to suggest is that the researchers is actually the easy one, and it's a really good place to start. And it's a good place to start because lots of really successful Niuean people are already working in that environment, and you've got somebody in Tarkolin who actually set up the funding system within the Health Research Council. But once you start thinking about governance models, then you're actually talking about how do we embed values in a system in a sustainable way. So we're not talking about a particular project. Any project is about creating an example for others to follow, right? Projects should not, a particular research project or a particular development shouldn't be regarded as just a standalone thing. It should be a beacon to say, this is an example of how to do it. There are lessons to learn here. Let's follow them. We have real challenges in the data environment, though. And how do we actually create a sovereign data system in terms of collects data in a safe way without giving it to Google or giving it to Amazon, storing data in a way that you actually know where it is and you can access it and share it with other people in a safe way. And that might mean, right, if it's confidential data, you may not want that to go over a particular internet node that may or may not be surveilled, right? So that includes moving data, analyzing data. A lot of tools data is only really valuable if it's used, right? And it could be used in terms of what Tahu describes as whakapapa data. It's kind of its use is a foundational essence of identity. But if we're talking about using data and analysing it, how can we do that in a way that is safe, with tools that are safe, right? And realise the value of what we've actually got in a safe way. Do we have the tools? Do we have the people? And that then brings us to the issue of how do we reuse data? There's a lot of data that's already there. Data is really, really, really expensive to collect. And so there is value in there's quite often value in reusing data, and that is particularly in the case of New Zealand government data because they've gone to the effort, energy, and expense of actually collecting data. So what is there that we can actually use? In the Pacific, there are other sources, right? There's some of the other sources, for example, the routine fisheries collection data that is massively underutilized, but could be absolutely a gold mine for understanding what's happening to the Pacific marine environment. And that means that if you actually start reusing data and collecting data, you're now talking about data archiving. And how do you do that safely? Because there's only, we actually need to start thinking about governance and data systems in tandem because you can only really have effective data governance, right? If you've got control of the data. If somebody else has control of the data, you may make a decision about it, but you can't affect that decision. You can't implement it. So, and possessing the data, you then actually have the ability to control it. You control the boundaries of the data, what happens to it, and who can access it. As Tahu alluded to, there's very few data sovereign environments in New Zealand. We actually have a government department in internal affairs whose initial policy was store everything overseas because it's cheaper. Right. And so a lot of government data, not all, but a lot of New Zealand government data is actually stored on global cloud networks. In terms of research, this country spends used to spend about $1.8 billion a year on research. We do not have a national data archive. Right? We do not know where the research data goes. So it's all up to individual researchers or their institutions. And so what happens there is that it's really hard to establish what good practice is and good governance because we haven't got a single entity, but it also means that we're not actually able to realize the value of the data. And if anybody's gone to try to find some old data sets, especially with regards to Pacific data, and I'm thinking in particular of the Tokelau study, it's gone. Right? Because there's no single safe place to store it. We're relying on the goodwill of the universities. And if it's in the universities, then they have the governance structures. They have control. There are community models, and Tahu has talked about the exemplary community model in Aotearoa. That is without peer. That is and that's a really good example to follow. And that report that they've done is a really, really useful starting point. One of the things that is happening on the horizon, though, and that is getting to change this, is the discussion about sovereign artificial intelligence. As somebody who sits on several sort of international or global AI policy groups, then actually I think I'm down to 2 now, which is great. Our big concern at the moment is that the artificial intelligence industry is in data harvest mode because they've harvested everything they can that's in the public domain, and they're now after private domain data. And they're really interested in Indigenous data because guess what? There isn't much of in the public domain. So we have to be really careful there. So if we're going to talk about data tools, what are our big concerns, right? Do your data tools copy or relocate your data? If you see these services say, "Oh, we'll store your data automatically. We'll give you a free backup," right? Read the license agreement, and you might find that there's something pretty scary there about their ability to claim ownership or use rights of what you've just handed over. So unfortunately, at the moment, a lot of the tools that we routinely use, right, including my company, we're sacrificing data sovereignty for convenience and simplicity. So what we're doing is going, okay, this is a nice, easy to use tool, but in the process, I've got to upload my data or hand over my data or will be copied somewhere by default. And so we actually lose control over it. There are solutions, but these are emerging rather slowly. And so the solutions are in open source tools, right? And when we build in open source tools, it's about sharing our examples for others to follow. Now, this works really well, but it does require more setup time, sometimes money just in terms of paying human time, but it's lower cost in the long term. Right? We're actually doing this now, right, with a couple of organizations here in New Zealand, building open source exemplars that somebody can go, this is an example of an open source data system. I can just take that because it's open source and copy it and set it up on my own system. It is one of the big things that we actually have to think about in the Pacific. And that starts with data storage. How do we do data storage for Pacific nation states that is safe and secure, right, and backed up? And sometimes in an environment that could be slightly hostile. So what we're suggesting is have a look at some of the data tools. R is actually come out of Auckland University. It's free software. It started as statistical software. Now it's data management software, and it can actually, there's some packages in there that help build data systems. Insight is a point and click version of the statistical arms of R. My company now supports that. It will remain freeware and open source. There's Nextcloud, which is a way of setting up data systems so that you can actually have storage over there, access points somewhere else, but it links it all up together without actually having to move the data. So you can actually, which is fantastic. And you've got some other tools like Hadoop that are now being routinely used. This is the future, but the problem is, how do we learn about it? What I'm going to suggest is a really rapid way of affecting change is just do stuff, right? And one of the great things that Niue has got to offer is leadership. Here's an opportunity to take the lead and declare what are the expectations with regards to Niue data. We did something similar with the Roeka Mangai, which was the Māori directors from the National Science Challenges. We just sat down and wrote it and we published it. And very quickly, it got picked up by ethics committees. It got picked up by funding bodies, to decision makers about, who would fund research as the guiding principles for what looks good with, in this instance, Māori data. So this is how we embedded Māori data sovereignty really, really quickly in the research, funding, and ethics system in Aotearoa, because we just front-footed it. We just said, this is what it looks like. Building on the work of Te Kahui and Te Mana Raranga as well. And when you see good practice, it's a matter of supporting it and holding it up and shining a light on it and saying, this is how it's done. But in the routine data collection things that we do, it really insist on good quality data, right? And say, if you're going to be collecting ethnicity data, then this is how you do it. If you're going to be doing work with Niuean data, this is how you do it, and actually have some quality metrics. But really importantly is start building the next generation of data literate, data literate Niueans here in New Zealand and Niue and wherever. Now, although I'm a sort of a statistician, I'm not advocating for people to be training up lots of statisticians or even official statisticians. But what I am advocating for is building a data literate body of future decision makers, so that you have, whenever there's somebody sitting around a table making decisions, they know what good data is, right? And because they're sitting around that table, they have the ability to make a decision supporting good practice. So it's about building that data literacy, that community data literacy, that means that the garbage that went before is no longer acceptable and would no longer even get off the starting grid. The other thing to do is link up with some really other good things. First and foremost, by linking up with the research funding system through membership of assessing committees, doing reviews, and the ethics committee system by maybe presenting to them or having members sit on ethics committees, you will change practice really, really, really quickly. Right? And once you change practice, then that can be adopted and picked up by other people. Then, of course, there's the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, which is the umbrella organisation of the Indigenous data sovereignty movement organisations in the various countries. They are our sort of representative on the national stage at the Research Data Alliance, at the IEEE, those kind of big at the UN. They are our umbrella organisation. So come in under the umbrella, and join us. Then the other thing is to start looking at who are some friendly allies in the open source development network. Who are some of the people who can actually do some of this stuff, right? And want to do different. And there are some companies in New Zealand like Catalyst Cloud who are really, really keen to work in this area. They're not driven commercially by it. They just want to do cool, useful, safe stuff that is innovative. And they want to be seen to be supporting really good data practice. And finally, I want to come back to the Pacific community. With statistics and development, we've got some people in there who are really keen to help develop some exemplars that can be rolled out or picked up by other Pacific nation states. And I've had some discussions there where they're really keen to look at ways of simplifying data processes for nation states in a way that reduces the burden, but also improves data sovereignty. So that's a discussion to have as well. So that's me. There's some initial steps there. I've focused on what can be done now. And I'm going to end with just one small plug for the paper that Colin mentioned. I've got a fantastic staff member called Nicole Satherley, who produced a report on how to do detailed Pacific nationality outcomes using official statistics here in New Zealand. That report is freely available, and just as an aside, she is now supervising a Niuean honours student in statistics who is looking at doing a master's using Niuean statistics, but there's no stealing just yet, right? She's an awesome wahine who's going to be a real game changer. And so we've managed, the South Pacific community have been generous enough to say we'll find her some Pacific data for her to do her postgrad studies on. So it's about building that next generation, and we've got some real Niuean superstars coming through the system, and it's really pleasing to see. Well, that's enough from me, and I'll hand the rako over to the next speaker. Kia ora.